everybody, it's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. Alright, so World War I is over. The League of Nations has been created. America is not going to join the League of Nations because we realized it was just designed to attempt to bully Germany. So we're going to stay out of it. However, as much as America wants to just stay out of everybody's affairs and be drama free, we bring the drama on ourselves pretty significantly at this time period. So right after World War I, we get kind of crazy in our own country, and it leads to some crazy stories that we're going to start talking about today. All right, let's go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to make myself smaller here. All right, so this picture right here is supposed to be the United States avoiding the League of Nations, avoiding treaties, avoiding the Treaty of France and England, foreign entanglements, because this ship here is supposed to be the Titanic. The Titanic at this point sank about 15 years before this, and everybody knows about it. Interesting enough, the Lusitania is actually the sister ship to the Titanic, is the identical ship. Crazy how that works. All right, so because both of those ships are supposed to be unsinkable and both got sank. One with a torpedo, so you can't blame it on that one. But, so this is supposed to be America as the Titanic trying to avoid these icebergs. The reference to the Titanic, because as popular as that situation is present day, it was a long time ago as well. So we will see that be referenced multiple times in multiple cartoons as we get through here. But yeah, so the American mentality is let's stay out of everybody else's business, all right? Isolationism is the idea that we just want to just stick to ourselves. America gained nothing out of World War I. We show up, we save everybody. Keep in mind, this is the American mentality. Now, everybody was exhausted when we showed up, but we showed up, we roundhouse kicked everybody in the face. We showed up, attempted with our 14 points. Nobody wanted anything to do with that. So we come home, we can see there's tension still in Europe. It's clear eventually another war is going to happen. Like that, it's crystal clear to America. And we're like, you know what? We're going to stay out of it. So America has this isolationist mentality. We're going to stick to ourselves. Y'all do you. When y'all start killing each other again, don't come asking help from America. All right? So isolationist, the idea that we are going to completely remain ourselves and remain alone because we didn't gain anything out of World War I, but we contributed a bunch to it. Is a new mentality in America that just the rest of the world can do their own thing and we're not going to have anything to do with it. What sadly goes hand in hand with the idea of isolationist, which is let's focus on America and forget everybody else, is nativism. Nativism rears its ugly head in the United States to an extreme after World War I. Nativism, it's officially here, prejudiced against foreign-born people. It's racism against immigrants. That's what nativism is. Since we don't like the rest of the world, we don't want immigrants coming here. So nativism is there's a lot of stories we're going to talk about in the next couple of lessons that deal with nativism. And even here soon, we're going to talk about a very, very, very crazy story that shows how far our legal system can go just in this idea that people are discriminatory against immigrants. All right. So this is a picture. This is kind of like the theater of what would happen. Show this guy's sweet hair right here. So this is supposed to be Europe, like a Europe immigrant. Keep in mind how they dehumanize people in cartoons when we don't like them. All right. This is supposed to be Asia here. This is supposed to be Europe, and they are consuming Uncle Sam from both sides. This is the big fear, like Uncle Sam or America will cease to exist because all these immigrants coming from other places. Couple things here. Number one, we are all immigrants in the United States. We came and stole this land from the Native Americans. Pretty much a genocide situation. So there's no core Americans to begin with. Not like the countries that have had people there for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So the fact that we're terrified of immigrants, yet we are all immigrants, is a little hypocritical. Also, all right. I don't know what happens exactly in this picture when they get to the middle. Is it like a Lady and the Tramp situation or what? But nativism comes out in large part because there is this fear that the American society and life as we know it will change, and influences from outside will be what causes that change. So that's the real crux of nativism, is the fear that other people will change our culture. After World War I, there's a legit concern that communism will take over in the United States. Now, communism, all right, I'll just go ahead and show you this picture of this very intense dude right here, Vladimir Lenin. Communism had taken over in Russia. So what happens in Russia is when you get rid of the very small rich people, very small group of rich people who own everything, and you divide all that money up among the poor people, the vast majority of people's lives in Russia improved very quickly. Communism works for a short amount of time. On paper, communism is a good idea. Is the fact that there's no more rich people, no more poor people, everybody's middle class. We have learned over time communism is not effective in the true Karl Marx sense of the word, where everybody is mandated to be equal, because when you take away people's motivation for becoming richer than your neighbor, the motivation across society goes down. When you can't move up, what's the point of working really hard? And you'll see that over the course of time in communism. And when people stop working hard, their economy isn't producing things, and they just can't keep up with capitalist society like America. Because we can make more stuff and more military equipment. And so if a war happens... Anyway, so kind of giving you a precursor here as we talk about communism in the 20th century. Communism is going to fail, but it's going to fail in the early 1990s. That's when it's finally going to collapse. The Soviet Union, which we haven't really talked about much yet, is going to absolutely collapse. Until then, it looks like communism might take over the world. Who's going to take over the world? Either communism or capitalism. And it starts here. This dude, Vladimir Lenin, takes over Russia. For a short amount of time, everybody's life in Russia improves drastically. So where communism takes place is very, very poor countries where there's a lot of poor people who feel like there's a small group of rich people who have an advantage, like America. So there is a communist party that shows up in the United States, and tons of Americans are terrified that communism will take over here and they'll wipe out like our existing way of life. And so there's this legit fear that communism will take over, and it's called the Red Scare, because communism has a team color. I don't really know why communism gets to be the color red. I'm sure it has something to do with blood, just like the American flag. The red in the American flag symbolizes blood. But the Red Scare is the fear in the United States that communism could take over. Now, let me clarify something with Russia, as we're going to focus on America here, but let me talk about what is in Russia, so when I reference these words in the future, it doesn't confuse you. So there's communism. Communism is the idea that everybody is common. There is no rich people, there's no poor people, everybody is equal, and you work for the betterment of the state. Period. End of discussion. That is core communism. That is what Russia has. You can only have one political party in a communist society, because debate is bad, because that means there's different views when everybody should be exactly the same. So any uniqueness is bad, even more than one political party. Very different than America. So the political party in Russia is called the Bolsheviks. Like Republicans, Democrats in America, the political party in Russia that's communist is called the Bolsheviks. There is one political party, the Bolsheviks. So they really committed to Karl Marx's idea of communism. A lot of times people just will refer to communism as Bolsheviks, right? You ever hear the word Bolshevik? Just associate that with communism. You'll see that in video clips and things like that, test questions. You ever hear the word Bolshevik? Means communism for this class, all right? Because that is the name of Vladimir Lenin's party in Russia. Vladimir Lenin is in charge of the Bolshevik Party. Therefore, since there's one political party that runs the whole country and this guy's in charge of it, Vladimir Lenin is in charge. Now, as we move on here, Vladimir Lenin is also pretty old at this point. He knows he's not going to live super long. So he's already training his understudy, the guy who's going to take over for him, a guy named Joseph Stalin. And we'll talk a ton about him as we move forward in U.S. history. By the time Vladimir Lenin takes over, and he'd spent his whole life trying to take over Russia, by the time he does, he already has a replacement in place because he knows he's not going to live real long. And they're in power for life, more or less. All right, so this is the fear of communism taking over America. People in America freak out because communism is successful in Russia. If it comes here, I mean, they ban religion. Anything that could put themselves above the state is banned. America, religious society, not going to be a big fan of having religion dictated here. So there's all these fears of communism. There's really no chance, looking back on it, that communism would have ever taken over or ever will take over in America the way it does in Russia. Very different foundings of society, different concerns in society. It was never going to happen. It doesn't stop people from freaking out over the idea that communism could take over. And there are people in America that would love it to be communist. They're part of the Communist Party. It's not a majority of the people, but there is a movement wanting America to be communist. And people panic and freak out. So you get pictures like this. The red iceberg is supposed to be America once again, calls Uncle Sam. And you got this iceberg here that could sink America. The Titanic references are big. So, like, the Red Scare. This is this time period in America after World War I. People were terrified communism was going to take over. And they feel like, and this is an important thing I need to point out here, it's not Russia invading us that's going to make us communist. It is communists inside America that are going to infiltrate our government and take, like, super conspiracy theory-ish. So it's not like I don't have a bunch of cool documents and stuff to show you about what the fear was, because it was irrational fear. But conspiracies and irrational fear, people will believe anything. Like, we literally had to go through a couple years ago and reprove that the earth is round because people started genuinely believing the earth was flat. It's not. It's round. All right? So, just because there's logic there doesn't mean people always believe it. But this is the fear that America's going to be communist. This is literally comic books that come out. Look at this. This is what people thought would happen. Like, what? Like, America under communism. Like this isn't what's happening in Germany. Or, sorry, Germany, Russia. I should not make that mistake, because very different countries and they hate each other. But so this is not what's happening in Russia, unless you're rich, then bad things can happen to you. But so yeah, completely irrational fear that America is going to get attacked from the inside and communism is going to take over. So here's the biggest example of how stuff freaks out in the United States at the time. The Attorney General of the United States, part of the Justice Department, all right, right after World War I, is this guy, Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer, all right? So Mitchell Palmer becomes convinced that there's going to be a communist takeover in the United States. Dum. There is a communist party in the United States. It's got 70,000 members. Now, there's like over 100 million people in America at the time. 70,000 members is really nothing. But 70,000 isn't a not big number either. There are people in the United States who would like it to be a communist country. And so this really freaks everybody out. It goes back to those, everything's on fire. So probably 69,999 of those people in the Communist Party are just normal working class and immigrants. That leads to the nativism. Immigrants are more likely to be communist because they're the poorest part of the population. Communism supports the poorest part of the population, redistributes all the money. So there is this fear that communism can take over, and probably everybody in that Communist Party are normal. They're like, hey, let's vote in communism. Well, there's at least one crazy guy in that Communist Party who wants to do so aggressively and starts mailing bombs to government agencies. Well, America's already terrified of communism. They already don't like this new Communist Party that has come out. And once there's at least one person in it mailing bombs, that is all it takes to make communism enemy number one. So once some bombs started getting mailed out by the Communist Party in the United States, Mitchell Palmer here gets a blank slate, a blank check basically from the United States government to go stop communism. Palmer convinces the American people, because he's the Attorney General, the head of the Justice Department for the United States government. He is convinced and convinces the American people that there is a hostile attempt by communists to take over the United States government, and we have to root them out immediately. So what ends up happening is these things called Palmer raids, where they go to people's houses that are suspected of being communist and just bum rush their house, destroy all their stuff, grab them, throw them in the back of a car, and take off, never to be heard from again. This kept happening. The problem is, he's not really showing evidence that he is finding this hostile communist takeover. So here's pretty much what happens. I'll give you an example. Say I live in a house, and I live next door to Billy. You know, this is in class, I randomly pick somebody, but we'll say Billy. That if I live in a house and I live next to Billy, all right, and let me show you when I talk about these Palmer raids, this is what he would go through and destroy somebody's house. Say I live in a house, I live next to Billy, and Billy, daggone, Billy's got a big old Great Dane dog. Takes a dump in my front lawn every day. I've told Billy, don't let your dog take a dump in my yard, but Billy's dog takes a dump in my yard every day. So I come out one day, and Billy comes by my house, or he comes out and lets Brutus, his Great Dane, come over to my house and takes a big old dump on my Sunday paper out my sidewalk. As I'm sitting here looking at him, I'm like, what? Billy? And I look over, and Billy's over there at his door. He's like, that's right. Good job, Brutus. And this horse-sized dog gets up with a horse-sized dump on my newspaper and like wiggles off back inside. And I look at Billy. I'm like, what are you doing? Billy gives me the finger and like runs back in his house. So furious. Can't stand Billy. Awful neighbor. Well, we'll pretend like this is happening at the same time the Palmer raids are. So I'm like, I know how I'm going to get Billy. So I call the government and I'm like, hey, pretty sure my neighbor is a communist. Calling somebody a communist is like I can't overstate how powerful it was to call somebody a communist. You don't joke about it. It would be the equivalent of accusing somebody of being a child molester today. Not something you joke about. You better have some evidence when you back that up, and those words carry weight. This is basically at this time. So if I call the government, I'm like, I'm pretty sure Billy's a communist. They'll be like, oh, why is he a communist? Now, I might be a complete idiot and have no idea why Billy's a communist, but I'll make something up because I was like, oh, well, he's doing communist things on communist days of the week, and they're like, good enough for us. During the Palmer raid, you didn't even really have to have evidence. All of a sudden, all these cars show up, they kick down Billy's door, they grab Billy, they throw him in the back of the car, and they take him off, never to be seen from again. I'm like, huh, that was easy. Well, Billy is mama's boy. He can't move far away from his mama because on the other side of Billy's house, that's where his mama lives. And she was like, what happened to my sweet baby boy Billy? All right. And Brutus. They shot Brutus. That sounds really dark in this story. This is Palmer raid stuff. I mean, yeah, the dog's getting shot in the Palmer raid. It was so, that makes the story dark, I realize, but yeah, Palmer raids were no joke. So, Mom's like, I don't know what happened. It was Mr. Wagstaff. He's a problem. He had something to do with this. So Billy's mom calls the government. It's like, I'm pretty sure Mr. Wagstaff's a communist. And they're like, oh yeah? Why is that? And they're like, oh, because I saw him eating communist cake the other day. Because people don't even really understand what communism is. Doesn't keep them from being terrified of it. I saw him eating some communist cake the other day. And they're like, say no more. And so they show up at my house, they come in, they kick down my door, they grab me, they beat me with nightsticks, they put me in handcuffs, they're leading me out. I break the handcuffs and start roundhouse kicking everybody, and they have to bring him back up. It's my story, and I can tell it how I want it. And they have to come in and get like a gorilla cage and like tase me down, and they finally get me in the back of a car, and they take me off, never to be seen from again. All right? This was a typical of a Palmer raid. Now, were me or Billy actual communists? No. But they were going to use very heavy-handed force on anybody accused of being a communist. Keep in mind, it's not even illegal to be a communist, but they're arresting you for it. So when people panic, a lot of your constitutional rights get kind of thrown out here. So Palmer has tons of these raids. They keep arresting people like me and Billy because what's happening is people are using the government to solidify personal problems. Like if me and Billy were having a problem, this is what caused us to have each other arrested. So they knew just accusing your enemies of being a communist, the government will come and take care of your enemies for you. That started happening more often. He keeps arresting more and more people, keeps destroying more and more property, and they never uncover any attempt by these communists to, have some overthrow of the government. However, like that one guy that was melting bombs, apparently they don't catch him because this is an actual picture of Palmer's house. They mail a bomb to it and like blow up his house. He was not home when this happened, but I do think he had a maid that worked for him. Government must pay well. And I do believe she was killed because when she brought the bomb inside, that was mailed to her. So the one guy they're looking for, they don't catch him. But the Palmer raids really show what the Americans will accept with no evidence. That letting the American government attack American citizens because we're terrified of, communism, where the government might attack citizens. So the Palmer raids are indicative of how America can react when we are afraid. We figure it out relatively soon after about 6 or 7 months of this, and they actually start using the word terrorism, that America is terrorizing their own people. Because when there's no evidence of this happening, A. Mitchell Palmer loses his position. He ends up being the bad guy, and rightfully so. That he is very much wrong. He's just wrong, and the American public realizes that, and the Palmer raids are stopped. But it is indicative of how America can have a knee-jerk reaction and panic over stuff. Oh, man. So, changing gears here. This is a court case, and it is bonkers. Let me tell you the story. Start with these two gentlemen right here. All right. So, this is probably one of the most famous court cases in the United States that you have never heard of. All right. This is the court case of Seiko and Vanzetti. So there is a new group of immigrants that we don't like. So America's always like, oh, we hate immigrants. It was like, oh, we hate the Irish. Like, oh, they took our jobs. It's like, oh, it's the Chinese. We hate the Chinese. Oh, they took our jobs. There's a new group that America now hates. New group of immigrants. The Italians. So since Italy was on America's side at the end of the war, after the war's over, we allow immigration to come to America from Italy. But since Italy switched sides in the war, America magically just was like, oh, they're not trustworthy. So if you're Italian, there's a lot of discrimination against Italians in the United States at the time. I need to preface this story for that reason. All right, and Seiko and Vanzetti are Italian. So here's what happens. So at a factory, if you work in a factory, you get paid on a Friday. When you show up to work, they pay you at work. They pay you in cash, all right? So to have that much money at the factory, there is a guy that shows up in the middle of the night at the factory who sets up to prepare for all the workers to show up on Friday mornings to get paid. That man's name or his title is a paymaster. Well, there's a paymaster showing up at this factory. It's closed, all the lights are off, and he's getting his stuff out of his truck to go inside. And somebody comes up and murders him and takes the money. All right. Well, the police show up to investigate this. They see the dead paymaster. All the money is gone. Oh my gosh, what are we going to do? You know, it's in the middle of the night. There's no eyewitnesses. Well, there's a little old lady down the street. She's like, I was out walking my dog at 1 a.m. when this happened. Now, she's like a mile down the street. She has like Coke bottle glasses. She can't see. And they're like, oh, well, what did you see, ma'am? She's like, well, I'll tell you what happened. It was two Italian guys. Now, why do you think she said Italian guys? Could it be because she's racist? Yeah. Nativism and racism, same thing here. So she said it's two Italian guys. And they're like, great. 0% chance she could have seen this. But she said it's two Italian guys. So they go check at this factory to see how many Italian people work there, because they would know when the paymaster would be showing up. There's two Italian guys out of 300 people this factory employs, and that is Seiko and Vanzetti, the two guys here. They show up that morning and they arrest Seiko and Vanzetti. That's right, they arrest them at the job where they, in theory, just killed a guy and stole all the factory's money. But they showed up at work the next day. All right. So they arrest Seiko and Vanzetti. All right. There's zero evidence against them. No evidence against them. But they arrest them because this lady said it's two Italian guys. Okay. Neither one of them have an alibi. They're like, I was at home. I was asleep getting ready for work. Not a good enough alibi. So, okay. Once they do a background check on them, they realize that not only is Seiko and Vanzetti Italian, because in America's mentality, that's strike one, they're also part of the Communist Party. That's strike two. Neither one of those are illegal. Number three, they were both drafted in World War I because they were here before World War I and have fled to Mexico to not fight in World War I. All right. Now, keep in mind, at the time, America was going to be fighting against Italy, and they were from Italy, and maybe they didn't want to fight their own country, but whatever. They are draft dodgers. Three strikes in the mentality of the American people that these are bad guys. All right. Draft dodgers, communist Italians. So Seiko has a gun. They go to his house and get his gun, but everybody had guns. It's the 1920s. They go to trial. They speak very limited English. They still speak Italian. They don't even understand the questions that are being asked them. Now, I should also point out, they're apparently massive jerks, that they are furious at this situation. They're like, the judge is Judge Webster Thayer. This is the judge in their case. And they're like in jail being like, oh, I'm going to get back at that guy. So they are kind of jerks as a person, but they have a right to be, all right? There's no evidence against them. They go through this whole trial, which lasts a really long time. At their sentencing, all right, they are, Judge Webster Thayer here says, you know what, you guys probably didn't do this. Y'all probably didn't kill this guy. But since you're basically the example of everything we hate in America, meaning they're Italian, they're communists, they're draft dodgers, I want to sentence you to death anyway. That's what happens. Seiko and Vanzetti are electrocuted in the electric chair for having killed the postmaster or the paymaster and never once had any evidence to back it up. This is shocking. This is the American system. This is due process. We have a constitution to prevent this from happening. You are innocent until proven guilty, all right? There is no evidence that these guys committed this crime. Not only were they convicted, they are sentenced to death, and they are both killed in the electric chair for a crime there was no evidence that they committed. America is shocked by this, and rightfully so. This is probably one of the most talked about miscarriage of justices throughout the 20th century, the 1900s. So if that was the end of the story, you would have heard about it by now. But there's a very odd twist. So by the 1980s, there is new technology that comes out called ballistics testing, which means that if you fire a gun, like each gun leaves like an individual fingerprint on bullets. So they have the bullet that killed the postmaster, right? From an autopsy, they took it out. They still have Seiko's gun. So in the 1980s, like 50 years after this, they have ballistics testing, and they're going to prove once and for all that Seiko didn't do it because they can match the bullet, all right, and the gun in which it was shot. It just happened to be the same caliber. When they ran the ballistics test, the bullet matches. That there is that Seiko's gun, what we do know is Seiko's gun is who killed the paymaster. And it kind of blows everybody's minds. They're like, wait, what? There is a chance Seiko and Vanzetti actually committed this crime. There is a chance. However, it doesn't change the fact that you're innocent until proven guilty in the United States, and you have to prove that they were guilty, and there was no evidence to prove that they did. So even if they had done it, they had gotten lucky and actually executed the 2 guys who had done this. The fact that they did so with no evidence completely violates our entire Constitution. But this, on top of the Palmer Raids, shows how far we will go to ignore human rights and things like that at the time if we were emotionally fragile. All right, so there is a massive reaction to immigration, a negative reaction, nativism. All right. So people are like, oh, I hate all these immigrants coming in and ruin the country. I wish we had a hate group that could like stand up to them. And there's a little group in the back. It's like, hey, you know, we already have a fully functioning, fleshed out hate group. It's called the KKK. We can bring that back and harass the immigrants. And everybody's like, yeah. As crazy as that sounds, the KKK comes back in the 1920s and is extremely popular because they're against immigration. They don't want more immigrants coming here. They get 4.5 million members, is almost 5% of the American population. All right. If that doesn't blow your mind, check this out. This is a a picture of a Klan rally in Washington, D.C. It wasn't even unpopular to be in the KKK. And the KKK is a Christian organization. It is a white Protestant male to be in the KKK. And the KKK comes out against immigration. Now, when the KKK had 4.5 million men in their ranks, it is because they were against immigration. All right. This is not really lynching and stuff. I mean, it's a hate group. It absolutely is. But it's not to the extreme. That's the worst part of it, of the group. We're going to talk about it. But when the KKK comes out and they have these new official looking uniforms and stuff you see on movies and stuff today really come out in the 1920s. Prior to this, it was kind of bed sheets and stuff. But it is the KKK. So the KKK had basically been eradicated with the Enforcement Act of 1870 by Ulysses S. Grant after the Civil War. They come back, this is 50 years later, massively onto the scene. So it's the KKK. So this is basically what happens in the KKK when they had 4.5 million people. They're like, we hate immigrants. We hate immigrants. We hate immigrants. We hate black people. It doesn't take the KKK long to turn around and start attacking black people again. 99% of the people in the KKK who had joined it to be against immigration were like, wait a minute, no, I joined this to be against immigration. Black people, they're American citizens. Not cool, man. So I'll say 95%. 95% of the people who joined the Klan are like, I'm not cool with that. I'm out. And they will leave by the end of the 1920s. Well, who stays? The worst of the worst, the biggest pieces of crap, who then, because the Klan was so big, had all gotten to meet each other. So by the end of the 1920s, who's left is a group of just hate-filled white supremacists. Not that it wasn't a white supremacy group to begin with, but violent lynchings, terrorists. The worst of the worst of the worst is left by the 1920s, who are going to focus specifically in the South on black people. So the KKK comes roaring back. It was never a positive group, but it wasn't the stereotype that it will become very quickly after this when most people leave it. There's a lot of politicians that were politicians in the 1920s that you're going to see them in Klan outfits. And while the Klan is a white supremacist organization, most of the politicians were there when it was a political movement against immigration. The moment it starts being violence, and especially when they start attacking black people, the vast majority of people are going to leave because they're like, yeah, that's not really what we're here for. So there's another thing that's going to come in with a backlash to immigrants is a quota system. All right. For the first time ever, America is going to make like limits on how many immigrants can come into the United States. This is a cartoon here that this is supposed to be Uncle Sam saying this is not a dumping ground because this is supposed to be Europe dropping off like their worst people. Like you got your these are people they're talking about, like your trash people, your undesirables, your cast-offs, your rubbish. America's like, hold on now. We're not going to come out here and you're not going to be giving us all your junk, even though literally that's what the Statue of Liberty says is give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Like, give me your junk. America's like, no, we're kind of done with this immigration thing now. The way they're going to do it is a quota system. Basically, there's only a percentage of people can come into this country based on how many people are already here. So like 3% of the amount of people that are already here is how many that can come in each year. So since there's a bunch of Irish and English already here, 3% of that total number is how many more can come in each year. So this is a very small number of, I don't know, we'll say Ethiopians, all right? Then only 3% of the existing amount of Ethiopians here can come in. So that quota system really limits for the first time trying to stop immigrants from coming into the country. It is a pivotal change from the way America had done it just 20 years before this, which is like, come on into Ellis Island. Now we're like, nah, we're isolationist, we're nativist, we don't like immigrants, we're going to just ignore the world, and we're going to be discriminatory against immigrants now. All right, that's as far as we're going to get today. I'll see you guys tomorrow.